more diverse group known as the toothed whales or odontocetes, and they're much more varied in size, ranging from the tiny little porpoises there in the middle all the way up to the sperm whale. Most of my work has focused on the bottlenose dolphin, which is one of those ones kind of in the middle there, one of the more familiar species that a lot of people have heard of. This might be a good time to also just mention sort of the way we study sounds via spectrograms. So you're going to be seeing a bunch of these throughout the presentation, and we have one of a humpback whale, a segment of a humpback whale song that maybe we can show you here. It's going to scroll along as it's playing. So this is a visual representation of sound. So that's the much higher pitch part right up there, and now it's going to repeat the lower pitch.
Right, so the squiggles at the bottom are lower sounds, and then the ones way up, the little upside down V shapes, are really high pitched.
Exactly, yes. And but these visual representations are a really nice way to study sounds, because we can often see features in them that, since we're such visual animals, we can see a lot of features in the sounds.
Yeah. All right. I want to start tonight with a topic of conversation that actually came up in our last episode of Ocean Encounters, and that's the effect of noise pollution on marine life. That's not the focus of either of your research really right now, but it's an important topic, so I at least want to touch on it. Layla, how might the sound of a passing boat or other human-caused noise in the ocean affect the ability of whales or of dolphins to communicate with each other?
Yeah, very, very, very impactful. And I think probably the best way to illustrate that is through an example where I can play for you or show you an example of a dolphin listening and a boat passing by. This particular example was recorded via a tag that a dolphin was actually wearing on its back. So this is what the dolphin was experiencing. And when I analyze data like this, I take my headphones off. It's very unpleasant to listen to. Obviously, they don't have that opportunity to do that, and their hearing is a lot more sensitive than ours. So I think we're really just scratching the surface and understanding how noise like this may be impacting their ability to stay in touch with each other, even also to forage, since they use sound to find food as well.
Yeah, this graphic is just really striking to me. You can really see the little vertical lines, which is the dolphin doing its whistling, and then you have this massive, what looks like an explosion almost on the right there. And it, to us, it almost sounded to me like a low flying airplane or something coming in.
Yep, and these dolphins where I work in Florida, which I'll be talking more about in a bit, are exposed to these boat passages every few minutes during daylight hours. So it's very, very impactful.
Yeah. So we're still early on in the program, but I just want to see if our audience has any questions they want to ask about the impacts of noise, specifically in the ocean. My colleague Ken Costell is behind the scenes monitoring the Q&A. Ken, what have you got for us?
Yeah, well, as we expected, there are quite a few people asking already if there's any link between offshore wind activities and the increase in whale deaths that we're witnessing here on the East Coast.
Okay, increase in wind farms and whale deaths. Layla, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yes, I know. I mean, I've heard some of those causations being suggested, but there really are no data at all suggesting that wind farms impact whales in any negative way. Here on our coast, there are regulations against doing the construction of wind farms when endangered whales are in the area. And it's the construction phase that, if anything, would have potential to impact them through the noise of the pile driving. And there was a study in the North Sea that found that porpoises would leave the area during that acute sort of pile driving phase, but then would just return after it was over. And the operation of the wind farms themselves really does not generate much noise at all.
Right. Okay. Aaron, I know you've looked at the impact of marine construction, specifically the pile driving that Layla mentioned, but on other kinds of marine life. Do you want to weigh in with that?
Yeah, sure, I can. And also just to kind of weigh in and follow up Layla's points there, like when we're thinking about these marine mammals, we know they're very sensitive to sound, but we're also, one of the main things with wind farms is, right, that they're renewable energy, and we're in sort of a climate crisis right now. And so renewable energy is particularly important, right? And starting to reduce climate change. So, but within that context, I study actually how sound impacts a lot of fisheries species. So that's squid, black sea bass, scallops, lobsters, as we mentioned earlier on. And so here's some images of us kind of actually working here in Woods Hole, where we set up actual pile driving events, very similar to offshore wind farm development. And so we can work with squid or scallops or other animals and put them in proximity to that noise and measure behavioral or physiological responses to this pile driving activity. And the responses are pretty diverse depending on which taxa that you measure. So that one is you really just have to go out there and understand or measure that animal species to see if there's a response or not. And two examples might be actually if we compare squid to scallops here. So squid, you might think of it as actually really incredibly vibrant species. And so when they hear the pile driving noise, they actually ink, they can jet, they can color change, just like you see here. So this is actually a pretty relaxed squid coloration. But in the presence of pile driving, or when they're really alert, such as a predator, they're going to flash white and black and obviously shoot the ink out of the back. And then it's a very clear response, but actually they habituate to that sound really quickly. So their responses are over within a matter of a few seconds. But when we look at scallops, their responses are much more muted, which is interesting. So when there's a pile driving event, and you'll see, I think we might have a video that we could show you of that. So this pile driving is actually just a hammer sticking in a steel pole, and you can see that scallop, this is a juvenile scallop, closes with every strike. And so this can go on for hours, right, as they're hammering these piles into the seabed. And so with every strike, that scallop closes, and it tries to open up again, and then it closes, and then tries to open up again. And this, again, is not habituating like the squid is. And so they actually get quite exhausted. So their responses are not nearly as vibrant as the squid, but they are very continuous. And we found that it has a major sort of energetic impact on these animals and actually makes them more vulnerable to predation. So as you might imagine, scallops don't have a huge energy reserve, and this can really wear them out. So again, it's just like the very dynamic or differences between taxa, and if you really want to understand what those responses are, you got to go out and measure those animals.
All right. Ken, any other questions right now, or shall we keep plowing along?
Well, we are getting quite a few questions. Marie from California is asking, and I think we can probably broaden that to anywhere out beyond California, anywhere in the ocean. Are there any particular species in the ocean that are particularly affected by sound pollution? And I think it sort of dovetails with a lot of what other people are asking about how other species hear or respond to sound. So are there particular parts of the ecosystem that are most affected by sound?
I can try and jump in there real quick. So one thing to think about is that different animals have different hearing ranges, right? And so dolphins tend to be most sensitive in the higher frequencies, whales lower frequency, and fish and marine invertebrates actually lower frequencies as well. And so a lot of our ocean noise tends to be that that lower frequency component of sound, like that pile driving. And so that's why there's concern for large whales, for shipping noise, for example, and things like that. And that's why there's concern for these construction for marine invertebrates such as squid and whatnot. Another animal group that folks might be concerned with is turtles, sea turtles as well. They don't have particularly sensitive hearing, but there are concerns for low frequency noise on them as well. And so again, it just is really like each sort of animal group is its own sort of like their own little niche, basically their acoustic niche, and they kind of have to be taken separately to understand the influences of sound.
All right. Well, let's move on and get into some of the fascinating work that you're both doing now. Aaron, you study coral reef soundscapes, the many sounds made by animals on a reef. I have to say, I've been snorkeling before on a reef, and up until I heard about your work, I always thought of coral reefs as kind of quiet and peaceful, but they're really actually very noisy. Isn't that right?
Yeah, right. So they, you might think of coral reefs really vibrant in colors and animal life, and a lot of that animal life is actually making sounds too. So a really healthy coral reef is actually rich with sounds as well. So I kind of think of them as the Grand Central Station or the New York City of the ocean. There's just a lot of acoustic activity going on there. Biologically speaking, of course, we might think of them as the rainforest of the sea. And when you look at a spectrogram, essentially of the soundscape, essentially of a coral reef, again, on the y-axis, the vertical there is frequency, different pitches, and time is on the bottom, and low frequencies are towards the bottom as well. You can see that there's different partitionings there. So one of the most dominant animals you'll hear on a coral reef are snapping shrimp, and they actually dominate most of the frequency range that we can hear, so 2 kilohertz and above. And then that actually confines a lot of the fish diversity and the fish life down to the lower frequencies, so about 2 kilohertz and below. And that fish diversity is actually where we find a lot of the richness of the sounds. So we can play the sound for you in a second. And what you're going to hear is first the sort of the chattering of the fish that you see on the left, and then there's actually a passing humpback whale song going on there as well, and then a fish grunt. And then that's a good time to listen for that snapping shrimp pulses up above, and then the whale song again, and then you'll hear some more fish grunt. So let's cue this sound up.
I just love that fish.
Yeah, and so one thing to think about as this sound is playing is, right, all these animals are sort of communicating. There's acoustic activities happening on the reef at the same time, right? So just like I was talking to you over all these sounds, these animals have to communicate to each other in this really noisy environment. So it very much is like sort of being in Grand Central Station, so it's really rich acoustic environment.
I think we're all aware that coral reefs around the world are in trouble. A few sobering statistics here. Globally, we've lost 25% of reefs in the last 30 years, and we're on a trajectory to lose 90% by the middle of the century, 2050. Aaron, you've actually come up with a way to potentially use the sound of a healthy reef to help restore degraded ones. How did you even come up with that idea?
So as I mentioned earlier, I did my graduate work on studying marine mammal sounds, and actually we started using our fancy sort of marine mammal acoustic tools and building coral reef specific acoustic tools. So we're out there as a graduate student at the University of Hawaii, and we basically started listening to the sounds on the coral reef that were all around us, and realizing how vibrant those sounds were. And then when I came to Hui in around about 2012 or so, we actually started working down in the US Virgin Islands, which is an image that you basically see here, and deploying sound recorders on a range of reefs there, from healthy reefs that you just saw before to more degraded reefs. And really for the first few years, we tried to, this is us putting out some sound recorders on these reefs, and a graduate student in my lab, Nadege Aoki, and there's a collaborator, Yogi Girdhar there. We're here putting some sound recorders on reefs, listening to those reefs. And, we tried to basically figure out how to make good measurements and understand sort of what's going on acoustically on these reefs first, the patterns of those sounds on a reef. So here's a couple more acoustic recorders on reefs integrated with some other instruments as well. And one of the cool things we found is that similar to a really rich forest, you have these dawn and dusk choruses of fish. So similar to like you might hear bird choruses in the morning when you wake up. And we can use sort of the intensity of those choruses as an indicator of reef health, as well as the diversity of sounds within those choruses as well. And from these understanding these patterns of healthy reefs, and then of course degraded reefs are lacking a lot of those acoustic cues, and the choruses are much lower present and or often absent, particularly those fish sounds. We can begin to kind of discern or begin to kind of leverage this tool, right? So begin to kind of apply it across the Virgin Islands or other reefs around the world as well. What's really cool about acoustics is it's really a relatively cost-effective way of monitoring the health of the reef. So you can put these recorders out for many months at a time. And now we're understanding the patterns really well. So that means we understand what changes are, such as climate change, such as bleaching events, or even like, when COVID happens, and how does that change the soundscape of the environment as well. And again, what we're really kind of using is understanding the health and the biodiversity of those reefs acoustically. And of course, since we're doing that, we got to thinking, well, can the animals do that too? I bet you they can do that as well. And there was some emerging science that was coming out at the same time that fish larvae can listen for reefs. But our lab was really focused on squid and other invertebrates, and we thought, well, what about the foundational species on these reefs? What about the coral? Can the coral hear these reefs, and can they utilize that? And so one way we thought about measuring that was in terms of coral settlement, and can coral larvae basically find their way back to a healthy reef using sound?
Okay, so first off, maybe we need to just explain what coral is, and that it is in fact an animal, right? So maybe describe just what a coral is like.
So coral is it's related to jellyfish. They're a cnidarian. They're actually a colony. Each one of these corals that you see here, they're connected to other. One particular color that you see there, right? It's a colony that's connected to other corals. So there's all these individual polyps, so we call them there. You'll see some close-ups on some other images, I think.
Like
later.
little tiny anemones inside each little hole in the coral, right?
Yeah, exactly. All these little individuals that are connected together through this hard calcium skeleton that you have there. And so they're kind of working together as a colony. They're also sort of individuals, but they started out as sort of one genetic individual, and then they sort of have, they spread out across that colony and sort of clones of each other.
Okay. But early in their life, they're not as part of this hard skeleton of a reef, right? They're actually little tiny things swimming in the water. So
yeah,
how did you go from knowing that a healthy reef is sort of richer in sound to then actually using that sound to get those little tiny free swimming larvae to settle and grow more reef, basically?
Yeah, good question. So the first thing we needed was a reliable tool to do this. So we actually started some studies earlier on in about 2018, where it was a biologist kind of hooking some MP3 players together with some car stereo amplifiers and a speaker. But, working at Woods Hole here, we basically worked with a Hui engineer, Ben Weiss, and we came up with the Reef Acoustic Playback System, or RAPS, we like to call it, the coral RAPS. So you kind of see a diagram here, where on the top is some electronics and a solar panel, and it sits on a float. And then that blue thing on the bottom, you'll see an image, I think, in a little bit. That's a speaker system. And so we can actually control and upload those sounds just onto an SD card in the electronics portion, and then that'll play that at whatever set schedule that we want down through the speaker. And so to take a step back, the question that you asked was what's responding, or what about the coral, the early life of the coral? And so that brings you a little bit of the coral life history. So you have this colony of coral, right? And when it's ready to breed, it's basically spawns. And so it releases some larvae or packets of egg and sperm into the water column. So here, this is actually a video of a brain coral, and it's releasing packets of eggs and sperm into the water column. So the fish obviously know this is going on. Butterfly fish here feeding on the packets of eggs and sperm here. What has to happen?
Buffet.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? And so this is well-timed. This particular species is well-timed at night in relation to sort of the lunar schedule. And so we sort of know that now. We can predict when this might happen within a few days. And so we actually go out multiple nights in a row, and we kind of observe, and we can actually collect those coral spawn. What happens in the wild, or what naturally happens, is those eggs and sperm have to meet in the water column, fertilize, and then that has to develop into a larvae, and those larvae have to find their way back to the reef. The challenge is that because reefs have been degraded, and the acoustic cues on reefs have been degraded, larval settlement is some of its lowest that it's ever been. And so they've lost those acoustic cues that we can attract them back to the that they can use to get attracted back to the reef. And so that's where this RAP system comes in. We're trying to replay healthy reef sound to attract them. So these coral larvae are also swimmers. So this video here basically shows them kind of swimming around in sort of a vial of seawater here, but they're not Olympic swimmers. So we're kind of, again, sort of need to kind of leverage their ability to kind of attract them back here. And so we actually started this work on St. John, the area that we started listening to in 2012, where we knew where there was degraded reefs as well as the healthy reefs, and we could take that healthy reef sound and replay it on a degraded reef that you see here. So you see Nadej Aoki, a grad student in my lab, working on this. The blue thing again is that speaker. And because we wanted to ensure that there was larvae on these degraded reefs, we put them into these cups that you see here. So we put 20 larvae in each cup, and then a sound recorder, so we'd measure the received levels of sound at each cup, and then we would broadcast the healthy reef sound on these degraded reefs. And basically, the cool thing I want to sort of jump to is that it worked. So this was totally an experiment that we had no idea if it was going to work. Usually, you have a little bit of pilot data when you go into an experiment, but we really didn't know. And Nadej and our team basically spent the summer down there, and she came out with some really great results. So one is that not only do coral larvae settle in response to sound, healthy reef sound, but they respond to our replayed reef sound. So you might obviously think that the speaker is a little bit different than the natural world, and that's certainly true, but that means that we can begin to kind of enact this or apply this tool, and perhaps in restoration areas that we want to restore. Since then, too, we've actually shown that this works for a number of different species, including the Gulf whorl coral and the mustard hill coral. So that's pretty cool, because it shows that it's not just a one-off, it's not just a single species, but there's multiple species responding to this. So it shows you that, or suggests that it's kind of a scalable thing. We've been able to show that it happens not only in the field, but also in aquaria. So we can apply this in a lot of different restoration techniques. And it works out to a pretty reasonable range. So at least 30 meters, so about at least 100 feet from that speaker. And we haven't even reached the end of that yet. We just kind of stopped measuring at that point. Because again, we didn't think we were going to get effect that far out, but we did, which is pretty cool. So again, we kind of think we have this reusable, scalable tool and this response. And now what we kind of think about is we have this superpower that we can work with the coral, and we're trying to figure out how best to apply this.
That's a really exciting result. Layla, I haven't forgotten about you, but I do want to pause for just a second to check in with our audience. Ken, do we have any questions for Aaron?
Yeah, we got one from Carolyn, who is asking, Aaron, what's the noisiest reef you've studied, and does that correspond with the healthiest reef you've seen?
Okay, so that's a great question. So yeah, because you're differentiating noise versus sort of biological sound. So probably the richest biological sound that we've actually measured and quantified really well is in the U.S. Virgin Islands. That's Tektite Reef. What's really cool about that reef is actually that folks started listening to that reef since 1968. It was actually a NOAA and NASA undersea habitat. So aquanauts live there, folks like Sylvia Earle. But the noisiest reef that we've ever listened to is actually Molokini Crater in Hawaii. So that reef is a healthy reef, but around 8 a.m. every morning, they start to get snorkel trips and dive trips out there. And so that in this little sort of crater lagoon, and it just fills up with noise, boat noise. And it is loud, and you can feel it in your lungs and your body when you're diving there. And it's a very, very intense experience. And so, yeah, and we also know from a range of data that, just like marine mammals, vessel noise is a challenge for reef animals, and it can affect their reproduction and their early life, and so it's not really a great thing. So it's something to I guess really be thinking about and concerned about.
All right. Layla, I want to get into some of your work now. Maybe set the stage by telling us how scientists used to study dolphin communication.
Sure, yeah, it's a area of work that has kind of a checkered past, I guess. There was back in the 1960s, there was a scientist named John Lilly, who's actually featured in that photo, who really focused on the idea that dolphins were communicating in a language similar to ours. And so a lot of the focus was looking for specific whistles that might mean certain things, like one that means fish, and these little squiggles represent whistles. Another might mean shark or help me. And so they were trying to document these types of things in dolphins in captivity. And they also did a fairly controversial experiment where a woman actually lived in a tank with a dolphin for 2 months and tried to teach it how to speak in human speech. But that was kind of dead in the water, for lack of a better expression, because they don't have the same structures for producing sounds that we do. So it was really not a well-conceived kind of experiment. So these two approaches, for various reasons, didn't really yield much in the way of scientific discovery. But they did yield a lot of very widely read books. So John Lilly was a very prolific writer, and he wrote books that really grabbed people's attention and got people excited. The subtext in the one in the middle, The Mind of the Dolphin, says they may be a key to understanding alien intelligence. So you can imagine this was something that really got people very, very excited. And so it really led to a very widespread belief that dolphins are communicating in a language similar to ours. And I think there's a cartoon that illustrates this quite well, where it may yet be found to be true that they are communicating in a complex form of language that scientists are too dumb to understand. But that's, anyway, yeah, really very widespread kind of ideas about dolphins right now.
For all the Gary Larson fans out there, of which I am one. All right, so now let's fast forward. What do we actually know about how dolphins communicate, and what technologies are available to you and to other scientists studying dolphins and other marine mammal sounds today that maybe weren't available when this research started out?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, still before I go into today, maybe just one last sort of historical mention is that back in around the same time as John Lilly, there was a husband-wife team named Melba and David Caldwell who took a different approach, recording dolphins that were actually isolated in captivity, and they recorded them in air and just sort of one at a time. And I think there's an image of that.
Yeah,
maybe.
there is.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Okay, so so this was, fairly low tech back then, but it was something that got around this very significant issue of trying to identify which dolphin is making a sound, which was something that was actually continues to be very challenging, because you can't tell which dolphin is vocalizing, even if you're looking right at it. But since they isolated them in this context, they were able to find that dolphins actually produce individually specific sounds that they called signature whistles. They're still called that today. And these are really the closest analog to human names known in the animal kingdom. So this was a really exciting discovery. And it's one that's actually been the focus of a lot of my own research. So since the Caldwell's time, I've continued working on signature whistles, as have many colleagues who I've worked with on this as well. And yeah, so that's I guess kind of the next stage would be to give some examples of these.
Yeah.
These are spectrograms of 4 different signature whistles, just so you can kind of see that really distinctive shapes. These are very, very visually distinctive. For me, they start to look like faces. I've studied these for so many years. And I think we can, play them for you, even though they're actually visually more distinctive than when you're listening to them. But they're still
Yeah,
fun to
let's
listen
hear a
to.
few of them.
Yeah. The first one.
So these are sounds that the dolphins would make to kind of self-identify to other dolphins. Is that the idea?
That's right. Yeah. So in that sense, they're a little bit different from the way we use names, because they will swim around sort of making their own signature whistle, which would be kind of like me walking around saying, I'm Layla, I'm Layla, I'm Layla, which we don't tend to do, but they can't see each other very well. So that's, a really big difference between their societies and ours, that we can usually look across the room and see somebody, but they can't do that. So they
Right.
really rely on signature whistles to stay in touch with their group mates.
Very neat. And so what kind of technologies do you use to actually study this, and how have you been studying signature whistles in your own work?
Yeah, well, so I've been super lucky to work with a long-term research program down in Sarasota, Florida, called the Sarasota Dolphin Research Program. And one really unique research tool that we use down there are these catch and release health assessments, where we actually can put a net around a small group of dolphins in shallow water. And I would just mention, this is heavily permitted work. There's a lot of veterinarians present here, keeping track of the animals, and we really get a lot out of the brief time that we are handling these animals. There's about 40 some research projects going on at any given time, and the main aspect that I'm involved in is that we actually are able to record individual dolphins during this time with these suction cup hydrophones that we can actually place right on the melon or forehead of the dolphins. And this is an incredibly valuable opportunity to get really high quality recordings from known animals. Because again, that's really kind of the holy grail in studying animal communication. You need to know who's making a sound to be able to interpret how those sounds function. And that's been a very big stumbling block for studying dolphin communication. You might think too, though, they're being in this very unusual circumstance where there's all these people handling them and measuring them and things like that. But, are they actually making their typical whistles? Well, we have found that they are. They tend to make a lot of their individually distinctive signature whistles in this context. And it seems like it probably even more than usual, because it's probably similar to the Caldwells when they were isolated. They're trying to stay in touch with each other. So they tend to make a lot of these signature whistles during the health assessments.
And something you mentioned earlier that I just wanted to clarify, kind of went by fast, but you said that even when you're looking right at dolphins, you can't tell which dolphin is vocalizing. And why is that?
So they don't make any external movement when they vocalize. So if you go to a place, a public display kind of facility, and they're opening their mouth, or, watch some old Flipper reruns, that is a trained behavior. So they do not do that in the wild. And so,
okay.
So you really can't tell which one is making a sound, which is, for the most part.
So is the sound coming out through their blowhole? I mean, sorry to ask these silly questions, but
yeah, that's totally fine. It is produced in a region, the nasal sacs right underneath the blowhole, but the whistles are actually they sort of transmit throughout the body. They are, there's sort of a focusing mechanism in the melon for the more directional sounds like clicks, but the whistles are sort of emanate out throughout the body.
Wow. Okay. Let's pause there for a second. Ken, have you got any questions for Layla?
I have a question
I think
for Layla too.
Go for it.
Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
There was a question, or you've been doing some cool work about mother E's. Can you explain some of that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that was a really fun.
This got quite a bit of press, actually.
Yes. And but also it was a great example of how valuable these long-term research studies are, because we had compiled this very extensive data set over the years of recording animals during health assessments, actually over 40 years. So we were able to isolate a sample of females who we've recorded both over the years, both with calves, their own calves, and not with calves. So we were able to compare the whistles of the same females. And so what we found was actually when they're with their calves, they tend to increase the maximum frequency of their signature whistles. And this particular example are whistles that are slowed down quite a bit, 8 times, so that we can hear the frequencies. But you can hopefully hear in these examples, and as well as see in the spectrograms, that when this mother is with her calf, her whistle goes to a much higher frequency. So
it's higher.
Much higher.
Yeah.
And so we call that, we sort of called that motherese, or in fact, the press picked it up and called it baby talk, because this is it seems somewhat similar to what human caregivers do. Human caregivers tend to speak in a more sort of sing-songy, high frequency fashion with infants or children, actually even pets. And so it was really cool to see that we see potentially a similar type of phenomenon. So if you want to go ahead and play it.
Yeah, let's hear it.
That's cool. So yeah, hopefully you could hear the second one went quite a bit higher, and that was a really consistent difference for all of the females that we studied, was that all of them did increase the high frequency of their whistle when they were with their calves. So that was kind of fun. And as you mentioned, it did get picked up by the media, and so one of those one of those was the podcast Wait, Don't Tell Me, which was kind of exciting for me. So I think we actually have a clip of that we could play for everybody.
Brian, a study published this week found that female dolphins address their offspring using what? Don't do that. Well, yes, they speak in dolphin speak, dolphin squeaks, but what kind of dolphin squeaks?
That high-pitched annoying
Exactly,
voice.
baby talk.
Yeah.
Dolphins use baby talk.
Now, for fans of Wait, they will recognize Peter Sagal's voice there on the NPR show. Very cool. And there it is again. Okay, Ken, any questions from the audience for Layla?
We could do an entire show just on the questions we're getting in.
Oh, gosh.
We're at 117 already.
Wow. Okay.
I'm just going to go with this one. Jen is writing in on behalf of her 8-year-old daughter, who wants to know, how did you even figure out that the dolphins had these signature whistles, had names essentially?
Well, I can't claim responsibility for that. Melva and David Caldwell were the ones to figure that out back many years ago, when they recorded those isolated animals in public display facilities. And so we were building on their work when we started looking for them in the Sarasota dolphins. But
you've created quite a library now of
Yes.
signature whistles. I think we have a picture of that.
Yes,
Yes.
an amazing image. Yeah, it's really just incredible. This is 269 different signature whistles. These animals are not all alive right now in the community, but we've been recording since the mid-1980s now, and so we actually have this extensive catalog where we, like I think I mentioned before, they really start to look like faces. They're so distinctive, and I've worked with some of these animals for so many years that when I see their signature whistles, it's like seeing an old friend.
Yeah, it's just amazing.
Mhm.
All right. We're running a little behind where we should be, so I have to keep going. But Aaron, we talked about your promising work with corals on St. John. So what have you and your team been working on since then?
Yeah, thanks, Veronique. Always hard to follow Layla here and this cool stuff that he's doing. So awesome. So we've been doing a lot, right? It's like, where to start with that. So we're basically, one of the things we're doing is we're trying this in different locations. So we did a lot of work early on in St. John. So now we're trying, does this work to get coral larvae to settle in St. Croix, as well as the Cayman Islands, Dominica, different places in Hawaii, actually, Maui and Oahu. So not only just like focusing on the Caribbean, but the Pacific. We're working with different coral species, including the brain coral that you saw earlier, as well as rice coral, lace coral in Hawaii, finger coral in Hawaii. Cool things about the brain coral, right, and some of these others is they're really reef building species. So they're the ones that kind of are forming the protective reefs that we like that hold the fishes and protect our shoreline. So that's super important as well. And some of the questions we're trying to get is basically, how broadly applicable is this method? So can we use it in different oceans? Do the coral have the same sort of hearing sensitivity in these different oceans? Are there coral dialects, if you will. So can we take the St. John sound and get it to work in St. Croix? Or can we take this healthy St. John sound and get it to work in Maui? Or do we need Maui sound in Maui, right? So are there sort of preferences or dialects for these areas? And yeah, so we're sort of really trying to figure out basically how best to sort of use this superpower.
And do you have any of those results yet, or is that still a work in progress?
It's a lot of work in progress right now.
Okay.
So the Maui work is going to be went on a little bit last summer, and then it'll be going on again this summer. We'll be spending quite a bit of time there, and these are all sort of really taking off basically right now.
All right. Well, we will be checking back with you on that. Layla, how about you? Anything else beyond the signature whistles?
Sure, yes. One of the things that I'm really focusing on right now are what we call non-signature whistles, for lack of a better name for them. It basically are whistles other than the signature whistle that we've really started to be able to focus in on now that we have this large library of all of the signature whistles. And we've started to find really extensive evidence for shared non-signature whistles, so certain specific whistle types that are produced by lots of different dolphins. And so we're trying to understand how these function, and we're studying that through playback experiments. And I think we have a clip that maybe we can look at of one of these. We film them with drones. And so you can hopefully see if in this clip that when the dolphins hear the whistle, they turn away from this particular one. Go ahead and start that. Dolphins are down here. See, they take a sharp turn. As soon as they hear that, our boat is over on the left. And
All right, so you've got a speaker in the water, just like one of Aaron's speakers,
exactly.
And it's playing those sounds and they're reacting.
Exactly. So yeah, so showing it again
Let's
here.
do that one more time.
The sound, and you can see the dolphins.
There you go.
That sharp turn. And yeah, so that's exactly right. We use the exact same technology, actually, the same speaker. And we're trying these experiments with, it's challenging because we are, with some of the whistle types, we see different types of responses from, whether it's males or females, or whether they're in a group or not, so there's a lot of different variables that we need to try to isolate, as well as all the different types of whistles. So, but it's a lot of fun, very, very exciting and interesting.
Yeah, so if signature whistles are sort of like names, right? They're unique to each dolphin. And then you have these other sounds that multiple dolphins make, many dolphins make the same sound. So that's kind of like a word, maybe. So can we say that this is a language that they're speaking, or are we not quite there yet?
I would say we are not quite there yet. I'm always a little hesitant to, don't want to read too much into the data before we have more firm evidence for how these are really functioning. I mean, I think there looks like there is the potential for them to be word-like in potentially, each one having a specific meaning. But then from there to say that it's language would still be kind of another set of leaps that would have to be made. So I think we've still got a ways to go before.
Okay, fair enough. And Aaron, how close are you to turning your soundscape playback approach into a tool that conservation organizations or even local communities in coral reef countries could actually use to restore damaged reefs? What would that take, and how far out is that?
Great question. So right now we do have this really scalable product. It's pretty easy to use by, like I say, a Hui engineer. So we're trying to figure out how we can basically work. We're working with local NGOs and federal agencies such as the National Park, Nature Conservancy, Oceans Forward, NOAA, National Marine Sanctuary, to basically get feedback on how to make this really sort of a usable product by a lot of stakeholders, basically. How can we tweak it and make it easier for folks to use? Like I said, it's like we have the superpowers of how best to utilize it. So one of the things we're thinking about is bringing like currents in and putting them sort of downstream of where the coral larvae should be, use the tools smartly. And then, of course, we're also using some of the monitoring at the same time as well. So how best to assess these healthy reefs. So we're doing that again with sort of machine learning to detect and classify sounds and biodiversity. We're integrating sort of these listening tools with other reef health parameters, such as oxygen and nutrients and microbiomes. So both rapid and real-time assessments and more comprehensive assessments of reefs as well. So this is actually a short-term system that we can basically put out that has oxygen sort of integrated into it as well. We're using robots to help find reefs, so listen for reefs basically, and not only listen for the reef, but find the biological hotspots on those reefs as well. So where is the richness of those fish on those areas? So there's a Curie, a robot from the Warp Lab here at Hui, and we have these real-time listening buoys as well to get actionable information and data back faster.
All right, a whole comprehensive reef health assessment.
Yeah,
approach,
we're doing it.
really.
Yeah, do a ton, and we actually do a lot of these measurements, but always sort of with the traditional measurements as well. So this is just folks out basically along with our acoustic measurements. This is in the Cayman Islands where we do sort of traditional benthic surveys, counting the corals, counting the fishes that are out there as well. So we kind of standardize everything from this traditional method.
All right. And Layla, are there any conservation applications for your work? I mean, it's interesting enough just to think about dolphin communication, but are there other applications to it?
Yes, definitely. We have also been trying to integrate AI into our work by trying to automate the sort of classification of signature whistles in the hopes of using signature whistles as a population monitoring tool. So this image there's a lot on here. You don't have to worry about the details, but the basic idea is that instead of using visual surveys, which are very costly and time intensive, where people go out and photograph animals, acoustic monitoring, as Aaron mentioned, is very cost effective. And so we are hoping to be able to develop methods in Sarasota where we know so much about the animals. There's a whole network of hydrophones. We know all of the signature whistles. And if we can develop these methods there, they might be hopefully transportable to other study sites where there's not as much known about the animals, and be able to use this tool to track whether there's any kind of response to potentially an anthropogenic stress of some kind, if a population responds by moving out of the area or something like that. We should be able to track things like that. And we do also have another project that uses whistles to potentially try to predict mass stranding events. And these are very unfortunate situations where healthy animals come up on the beach for reasons unknown. And
our viewers in Cape Cod will be familiar with this phenomenon because we have kind of a hot spot here for that.
Exactly.
Yep.
So Wellfleet Harbor in particular, I mean, all of Cape Cod is pretty high levels of strandings, but Wellfleet Harbor, which is that center, very bright yellow part, is a very, very big hotspot for dolphin strandings. There was the largest stranding ever to occur in the United States last June there with 140 dolphins. And so we're hoping to, we've been recording in Wellfleet Harbor now for more than 10 years and are trying to detect sounds that may be linked with mass strandings to be able to hopefully give responders some advance warnings so that they might be able to get out there and kind of push them off to shore before they hit the beach. But that's another technology that we're going to be using AI. We're still a little ways away from implementing anything like that, but we're working on it.
All great stuff. So like I said, we are running a little long, but Ken, let's take at least one more question.
Sure. Meg has an interesting question in light of the fact that we have ASL interpreters to help some of our audience members appreciate what you all are saying. Layla, have you observed any dolphins that are not receptive to whistles or who might be hard of hearing or even deaf?
I mean, I might punt that to Aaron since he's actually studied hearing in dolphins. I wouldn't say that I've never seen any myself that have been not receptive to whistles, but I think there have been some dolphins documented with at least reduced high frequency hearing, right, Aaron?
Yeah, so there's certainly dolphins that have high frequency hearing loss. So just like as dolphins get older, they lose, and just as humans get older,
Yeah,
we lose our high frequency hearing, and dolphins are very much the same way. And there actually has been documented deaf dolphins as well, and they've been, they have calves and sort of, they're just robust, healthy animals, right? So they've been adapted to, they've figured out how to adapt and make things work as well.
that's a great question. All right. Unfortunately, that's really all we have time for tonight. I'm so sorry to all the folks who asked questions that we didn't get to, but I want to say a very big thank you to Hui's Aaron Mooney and Layla Saei for joining us to talk about sound in the ocean. Thank you both so much.
Welcome.
All
Thank
right.
you.
And thanks, Aaron. And thank you, Layla. Thank you also to my WHOI colleagues who have been working very hard behind the scenes to make this event possible. And to everyone who joined us on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube, thank you. Tonight's event was the third in our 7th season of WHOI's Ocean Encounters events. Our next event will be on May 7th, and we'll be talking about the evolution and impact of ocean imaging technology. So tonight was all about sound. Next time will be all about imaging. As you might know, this year is the 40th anniversary of the discovery of the wreck of the Titanic, and we'll be joined, among others, by someone who was actually on that expedition and was one of the first people to spot the shipwreck on the seafloor. It's going to be an exciting episode, so please watch our website, whoi.edu, for more details about that. In the meantime, you might want to take a look at the very cool merchandise at WHOI's online store, shop.whoi.edu. You get a 10% event discount for joining us tonight and at every Ocean Encounters. Tonight, just type in the discount code SOUND. If you enjoyed tonight's Ocean Encounters program, you can be part of WHOI's solution-based approach to ocean science. If you're already a WHOI member, thank you very much. As you know, a benefit of WHOI membership is receiving our award-winning Oceanus member magazine. If you're not yet a member, please consider joining so you'll never miss an issue. You'll get other great benefits too, and you'll be providing crucial support for our outreach and our science. Memberships start at just $40 a year. The average gift is $120, but any amount helps. If you do become a member, let us know that you watch Ocean Encounters. That will help us keep bringing you the science programming you enjoy. On behalf of Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, thank you and good night.